Welcome to the Let's Talk Growth podcast, where we focus on the topics that can help companies unlock their growth potential. Now here's your host, Bill Hupp.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Let's Talk Growth. Today, I'm joined once again by Mike Haldane, the founder and president of MarketWise Advising. Mike, how are you today?
I'm doing well, Bill. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being back. And we have another special guest joining us today. I'm so pleased to welcome a former colleague of ours at GTT, Josh Lehman. He's now the senior product manager of platform at Invenco by GVR. Josh, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Bill. I'm happy to be here and always good seeing some familiar faces.
Yep, no doubt about it. Glad to have you here. Why don't you start by just giving the listeners a little bit about your background?
Yeah, happy to. So my background, coming out of a technical engineering degree, electrical engineering, I spent about 10 years in different IoT companies, really focusing on cloud solutions and migrating kind of legacy cloud solutions to really more of a cloud native IoT platforms. And so that's what I continue to do at Invenco by GVR.
Well, that's great, and happy to see how your career has progressed since Global Traffic Technologies. And so, given your experience, how would you define product management?
So it's a good question. Before, as we were kind of playing this podcast, I was trying to figure out, there's so many different kind of ways that you can define product management because there's so many different pieces to it. And so the way that I've kind of defined it, or what I've kind of come to, is really looking at kind of the product and the value of the product. So if you think of product management, it's really orchestrating the entire journey and life cycle of a product. So really from kind of birth to eventually end of life of a product, you're really making sure that what you're building is going to have value for your users. And that value is obviously going to generate revenue for the company. And that you're kind of almost giving it a kind of a true journey in a way that allows that customer or that product to really grow and evolve to meet your customers' demands. And so there's a lot of short-term and long-term planning and strategic planning in order to do that.
I think that's a great definition for product management, but product management doesn't always look the same for every company. So how should companies identify the need for product management, and why is that important?
Yeah, it's a great point. Working with a variety of companies, trying to understand their needs. I've worked with companies that I've come in and they've had a very well-established product management. I've come into companies that had zero product management to speak of, and others kind of everywhere in between, right? And so every company is kind of at a different journey, and in a different journey at a different level of that journey, in finding kind of what they need as they grow and evolve from a small business to medium and large. And so one thing that really helps kind of identify that is maybe some of the struggles that are happening within the company, right? So one thing that I've seen is, I've come into a company and one of the things that can be pretty clear and obvious is that there's really a disconnect from what the product is to the customer and the value that's needed. Sometimes there is an unclear vision. The CEO or the owner or other roles or groups in the company are focusing in different areas, and there's siloing and there's kind of fragmentation on product design and direction. And so it really ends up being kind of this really disjointed experience for the customer because there's so many different views of the product that are being pulled in different directions internally within that company. So the time that the product actually comes out to the customer and is released, the customer kind of looks at it and says, well, this isn't really what I asked for. This isn't what I was expecting. And a lot of that just comes back to really good kind of product design, customer feedback on the iteration of the product, making sure that the product is really stellar for when they actually get it. And then just when you're done developing a product or done with the hardware design and you actually have your prototypes and launch it, that doesn't mean the product is done. There's a lot of supporting documentation, a lot of time that's needed, that's kind of forgotten. in the process, just because you don't really have someone overlooking the entire process. So that's kind of a key component of it. That kind of helps these companies kind of identify, okay, there's these different gaps that we need to try to solve, and putting in something like a product manager would really help kind of bring these things together, bring together the vision, and have someone really dedicated on focusing on that and getting feedback from the variety of different subject matter experts that we have in our company to really put out a really high quality, high value product to the customer.
Yeah, I think that's a great definition, Josh. And I was hoping that you would go down that path. In my experience, and you and I have worked a lot of these discussions together over the years, but the product manager is kind of in the center of all of this. So they need to be working with the sales and marketing team to really understand the needs of the market, the competition, the macro forces, and that sort of thing that are external to the company. But at the same time, the company has requirements, right? There might be technical requirements or technical debt that needs to be dealt with, and all of that needs to be taken into consideration as well. And likewise, there's the business part of it, right? What kind of a market is it? How should this be prioritized? What kind of revenue is it going to drive? What kind of margin is it going to drive? So to be able to pull all of those things together and then to prioritize the activity of the engineering team so that we build the right products at the right time, given the competition and everything else that I just mentioned, is really the way that I view this role. It's really to ensure that the customer and the company and all the folks involved with those two entities can be successful. And
Yeah.
I've seen you do this more than once, and so that was a big part of the genesis for having you on the podcast. Now, one of the things that I wanted to jump into was what happens when you walk into an organization that does not have product management. And I know it's a bit of a loaded question because you and I just spent the last year or so building out a process for a company that really didn't have, at least not in its formal form, any kind of a product management process. So can you talk a little bit about the way you view sort of, starting from ground zero and then building a function within the company that is product management?
Yeah, I can walk through that. I think one of the good points that you had is really around that prioritization too. I think that's kind of a key from what we've seen, right? Is that a lot of times you come in and there's kind of an idea of priority, or maybe it's some kind of last minute plan that you're trying to do at the beginning of the year, but it really needs to be an ongoing process as part of product management. And so when it feels like there's kind of that kind of rush, right? That just figure out a priority and run with it, and you don't have a lot of good data from the customer, the market, and things like that. That's where it's really clear and obvious that we really need someone to come in and focus on that, right?
Yeah,
So,
totally agree. And
okay.
one of the things that that you and I implemented was a way to get market feedback, right? We
Yep.
assembled an innovation council with the whole idea being that we wanted to hear directly from customers and channel partners and architects and those types of folks that have something to do with, that have a stake in the game as it relates to what ultimately gets built and delivered and has to be supported over a long life and that sort of thing. So yeah, if you could talk a minute about, kind of what to expect for any of those product managers that are out there that are stepping into an environment where it's either not fully developed or not developed at all. What, maybe just step us back without getting too specific, but step us back and help them understand what to expect.
So what we've worked on in the past, and which seems to work well, and kind of the research that I've done and in looking into this, the different companies that I've worked with, number one is always understanding the customer and the market, right? If you don't understand those two pieces as part of building out a product management department, it could be really challenging. Not only the customer and the market, but also the company you work for. What are the existing processes, right? What are the core features of the product that the company really sees as its core pillars within for the product? And so looking at those kind of internal pieces, looking at the market, looking at the customers, how is the product being marketed today? Are there existing processes that are in place to make the product successful? How does the prioritization process work, right? How do these different departments work together to make sure this product is successful? What kind of silos are there, right, that are inhibiting the success of the product? Other things too, like what's the product life cycle look like, right? Is there an end of life process? I've seen in companies where they just send out an email and say, it's we're not selling this product anymore. Well, what's the plan for that customer, right? How are we giving that message, and what's the plan for their evolution of that customer within the product line? And so these are kind of the different things, and it's really a big data collection, right? That's all the first 3 months are at a minimum, right? Is to just really understand those different pieces, because you can't come in and build up a new group, a new department without really understanding kind of what's around you to figure out what are the pieces that I can pull together and really make this successful based on all those different factors.
Yeah, that's a great perspective, Josh. You know, in our most recent experience, or maybe the last couple of experiences together, you were able to investigate and bring forth some tools and some frameworks that were kind of best in class. And I could name several examples of that, but I'd rather have you kind of talk about, you know, what you came up with and kind of what you think some of the best frameworks are for actually building and managing a product management process.
Yeah, there's a lot of different frameworks out there. I would say I wouldn't say one is better than others. I've used several safe OKRs, always in kind of a lean or an agile way. And you can lean further into like a lean or an agile as well. I think it kind of comes down to understanding what the best approach is for the company. You really have to align those frameworks with the overall with your overall company, right? Because you can't have really an OKR framework that you're going to use if your company as a whole doesn't use OKRs to do their prioritization, and so it gets really disjointed, right? It almost at that point feels like a silo, a product silo again, where you're siloing product management separated from the rest of the company. So the way that
Yeah.
I've seen it successfully implemented is really making sure whatever framework you use is really a framework that's going to be used really across the company, because it's a product led company, right? We're gonna have a product. The product is going to lead kind of where the direction of the company is, with all that different feedback from the different leadership and the different stakeholders. But we have to make sure that it's aligned across different functions. Otherwise, you just end up with a bunch of silos, which makes it really hard to communicate, and really have a successful product. So, like I said, I think definitely following an agile process, as much as possible, is key. Um, there's a lot of different agile frameworks you can research and figure out what makes the best for you. But we have companies like Microsoft and others that have used the OKR process. The Safe Agile framework is a pretty popular one as well. So we can go into more detail. Actually, that might be kind of fun to do at some point too for a podcast. Is just
Yeah.
talk about these frameworks. I mean, we could spend a whole hour probably just talking about one framework. But yeah, I think it's really understanding. Look at the different frameworks that are available. Identify the way that the product is and the company is kind of set up. Identify, which one is potentially the least painful to move to, and that's going to have the highest amount of value for the company, and then kind of make your decision to kind of move forward with one of those.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. How about on the side of tools, Jira, for example? Do you want to talk about some of your favorite tools, some of the tools that you have brought to the last few assignments?
Yes, I love tools. Product management tools are some of my favorite tools. They're getting really good, and so it's really exciting. I'm definitely a nerd as it relates to finding good processes and good product tools. But some of the good ones I've seen, I mean, Jira is through Atlassian is pretty common, a lot on the engineering and development side. Whatever tool you use, you just have to make sure it's really tightly coupled with the way that you're developing your product. So, for example, if you are using Jira, right, figure out for your product development, assuming that you're using some sort of product development tool like Jira, or version 1, or there's a variety of different ones that are out there as well. Um, Whatever you're using, make sure it integrates with whatever you're going to use for product. Because the most painful situations I've been on the product management side is having a tool that poorly integrates with the engineering team,
Yeah.
and then it's just so hard to prioritize. It's so difficult to communicate technical details and information and customer perspective and personas. So yeah, definitely make sure that they can integrate. So I would start with whatever you have from the engineering side, because that's usually first, from what I've seen. the engineering team, even if it's the small engineering team of, a couple people, usually they're using some sort of tool. And then based on that, figure out what works best. Like I said, Jira, they have this new feature called product discovery, which is awesome. I loved using that. AHA is a very well-known tool as well. I think there's a couple others like product board or others as well, but there's probably 3 or 4 top products that are out there, and then there's a few others, or tools, sorry, that you can use for product management, and then there's a few others. I would say if you're looking at a product management tool, one, make sure it integrates to basically almost every part of the company. Make sure there's a way that you can have feature requests integrated in it, right? Make sure it integrates with all the engineering and development pieces that you need to. Can it integrate with finance, right? Your ERP system, right? What other tools can it integrate with? Because the more integrations you have, your life gets a lot easier because you're working a lot less in Excel. So yeah, that's definitely something that you want to find what's best for you.
Yep. No, that's great, Josh. I guess the other question that I have is kind of a follow-on is, if you think about the situations that you've walked into where maybe they had a partially developed product management process, what would you say some of or maybe even a fully developed process, but still with some gaps, what would you say some of the most common gaps in product management are?
Yeah, so it's always interesting going into different companies because they're all at different levels in maturity as it relates to product management. I don't think there's ever a company that you go in and there's no gaps on the product management side. It's just it's such a complex position, and it touches so many parts of the organization that it's really difficult to it's just really difficult to get it all right from a product on a product team. Some of the big gaps that I've seen, um, a lot of what I've seen, I think would probably be the number one is just really poor voice of customer market research. So it's difficult in a medium to large size customer, or medium to large size company, to really get close to the customer, to get that voice of customer, and really to help to kind of drive the product. It can be a little more challenging to get close to the marketing team and the customer service team because you're working on so many kind of other pieces that you're trying to focus on that it doesn't feel like you have time to do that research. But I highly recommend, if you want a successful product, you're not going to do it by talking to all of your internal stakeholders. You have to reach out to customers, or at least get as close as you can to the customer. So if you're not talking directly to customers, which I think talking directly to the customer is probably a requirement from a product management standpoint, and that can be an internal customer, right? So when we talk about customers, we're not just talking about the person that's paying necessarily. There's internal customers as part of that as well, right? So some of the features that you're building, there might be benefits both internally and externally for that feature. We talk about that a lot on any platform, right? So if you're building a platform, a lot of time the platform you're building actually has more internal customers than external customers, because you're trying to build, work with other teams within your organization to build on top of it. So making sure you get really close to those customers and get really good feedback, make sure you have really good agile design as part of it, put together really basic frameworks or wireframes to start defining and building out kind of what the new feature looks like, what's the like jobs to be done and things like that as part of that role. And then from there, you kind of want to start doing your first kind of MVP design. So work on the initial design, try to figure out what you can do in 1 sprint or 2 sprints, right, to get something out the door quickly, and then iterate from there. I think one of the gaps that I see too is, companies or product teams that really are like, okay, we have to build 20 different features into this product before we can kind of have that MVP, almost like beta release. And they just kind of overwhelm themselves with the number of different pieces that need to be built, and they can't be agile, right? So you're going through, and you're, instead of first building a skateboard and then doing the scooter, and then doing a bike, and then doing a car, right? That's really the evolution of a product, is you want something that's functional starting right away, instead of saying, hey, we want to build a car, so we're going to start with the wheels and the frame and the body and all these different pieces. And the time you get to the end, it might not be actually exactly what the customer wanted, because it took you so long for the customer to even be able to touch it, right? And so making sure you kind of have those steps along the way for those customer interactions is really kind of important as part of that process. And then I think the last piece that I'll mention here is the vision. So vision is important, and it's sometimes it's hard to take the time to sit down, to talk to the leadership team, to look at the market and really dig in and do that market research in order to figure out what your vision is. At a minimum, you need a 5-year vision. Places like Amazon, they have 10-year visions, right? And so you need to really be thinking far out to figure out, okay, where am I heading, right? Because if you're looking just 1 year ahead, you're going to put out some cool features, but you're not going to build out an ecosystem that's really going to be the most beneficial to the customer, and have the most value to the customer. And so making sure you have that vision and then work your way back is a really great way to kind of figure out where you need to go in the next step in order to get kind of to that vision in that 5 to 10 year.
Yeah, those are some great points, Josh. And when you were talking about vision, I was thinking about, for many years, the Japanese companies have been famous for very long-term visions, not 5 years or 10 years, but 100 years.
Mm-hmm.
And to be able to have that kind of vision, obviously it's going to evolve and it's going to turn a little bit left and a little bit right, but to have a vision in mind as to where you want the company to go, what you want the company to be, is really important, because it does, to a large extent, guide the product management process. You need to know what goals long term, what objectives you're shooting for. And I love the analogy about the skateboard, the scooter, the bike, and the car. They all get you from point A to point B, and you may start with the skateboard, but ultimately you know that you want to be a car company. It's just that you can't do that overnight. So it's a great perspective.
The one other thing I was going to say, as far as a gap, is sales and marketing enablement. I think this is something that's really easily forgotten from products team, because they're like, once it's released, it's there, right? People can install it. People can put it in their or use the product how they would. But that's one piece that I would say, that making sure that your marketing team and your sales team are really clear on the product vision, really clear on the personas. And this is work that you should be doing with them throughout this process. But making sure that sales team is empowered, right, in order to make the product successful and the customer successful. As a product manager, you're not successful unless all the other teams around you are successful. I can't make a product successful on my own. I am just kind of the coordinator, so to speak, right, on all of these different pieces. And if I don't enable all these people around me and we all work together as a team, it turns out to be a disaster, honestly. You really need to make sure that you are coordinating with everybody and making everybody else successful and getting them everything they need in order to make sure that you're hitting your numbers from a new product revenue perspective, right? So that's the other piece that I wanted to add to the gap.
Josh, we've talked a lot about market research on the podcast recently. What do you see as the role of market research in product management?
Yeah, so product management and market research kind of go hand in hand in a lot of ways. You really can't have a successful product management unless you have some level of market research as part of your process. So a big part of that is obviously understanding your target audience and kind of what their needs are. Looking at your competitors, right? What are their strengths? What are their weaknesses? Doing a SWOT analysis is awesome. There's a lot of different tools like that. SWOT analysis, cost benefit analysis, not as much on the market research side, but just those types of things are super helpful. Ultimately, market research helps validate your product concepts and tracks the trends. So what it really does is it really validates what you're doing is part of your building out your product and your product roadmap. So the way that the product roadmap or my product roadmap would typically look like is that you would have, typically either by month or by quarter or by year, you kind of have your different priorities for the engineering team, and you kind of have, okay, what is this going to look like in that 5, 10, 20, 100 years, right? Um, and so what the market research does is validate that. So one thing that Mike had mentioned before is that bringing in things like having user forums or different councils, user councils to better to get feedback and have kind of a dedicated time. So it's really a focus group. If you can think of a user council, is that you're really putting together kind of a focus group that are existing users, and you're really making sure that you're validating your roadmap or different parts of the roadmap with those users. And so you don't want to, like I said before, you don't want to build products blind, right? You don't want to just start building products and then not get the feedback and then get to the end and say, hey, I wanted a car and you gave me a seesaw, right? Like you want to make sure you're headed in the right direction. And so that market research helps with that to make sure that you're doing that. And I would say, I don't know, Mike, I think this is where, it really ties in more with the product vision, I would say. It helps with the roadmap, but the market research really brings together and really helps with that product vision. That's so key in order to make sure you're going to be ahead of your competitors when you want them to be.
Yeah, I would go back to what you said a few minutes ago, and that is that if you are so internally focused that you are defining the product, the roadmap, the vision based on what the internal team thinks, and you're only using those inputs, the chances of you making some pretty significant mistakes in terms of the strategy are definitely there. And in fact, they're pretty strong possibilities. So the market research is a way to validate what the market is, what it wants, what the competition is doing, the big macro trends like we talked about a little bit ago, to be sure that you've taken all of that into consideration before you make any decisions about where the investments are going to be made. Because, just about any company I've ever worked for, and I've worked for some large companies that have lots of capital to invest, but even on those companies, there are limits and they cannot pursue every path simultaneously. They have to pick and choose what the best opportunities are for them, given their skill set, given the market, et cetera. And market research is just a great way to really understand those things in depth so that the best decisions can be made.
Yeah, it's a great point. I think expanding on that too is part of the market research. I think you have to broaden your view a little bit too. So when I think of market research, obviously what market you're in, right? If you have trade shows, right? Who are going to those trade shows? What are they offering those customers? And also, what technologies? Like there's a market level research on technology as well. It's almost like a technological research that's, I would say, kind of, I don't know, it's parallel to the actual looking at the market too. So you want to look at the market, but you also want to see like what innovative technologies are just coming out in general, right? What is Apple, Google, Amazon, what are they coming up with, right? Are the big, you know, keywords right now are AI, right? There's so much AI stuff flying around in the last year to 18 months that how can your company benefit from those APIs that are becoming publicly accessible from OpenAI, from Google, right? How can you innovate your market? I think that's where I've seen, if you look at different markets and how they jumped from an innovation standpoint, there's so many markets out there that they're not really cross-pollinating technology. And so when they're not cross-pollinating technology, you get certain markets that are so kind of behind from a technological standpoint that there's real opportunity for innovation. And so that's where it gets exciting, right? When you do that market research, you look at a market and you say, wow, there's a lot of cool things. And so big needs from some customers, there's some big money from some customers. And there's this new technology that's available that can solve this huge problem that's in this market. And so kind of looking across is really helpful too, and understanding, how different markets can, ultimately impact your market as well.
Yeah, AI is a great example of, a big technology shift, or invention, or, however you want to categorize it, that has a profound impact on everybody's product, right? Anybody that is in technology can utilize AI in some way. And, you and I have done some interesting things with AI just over the past, number of months. And I think that's pretty good proof that it really can apply to any software platform, or even a hardware platform that is using technology that could be enhanced by, the ability to incorporate AI in some way. So that's a great perspective.
Yeah, and on the AI train too, I would say, one thing that, and this is a little bit of a tangent, but even from a product standpoint, if you're not using AI, ChatGPT, Gemini, whatever your tool is for AI, if you're not using AI at least once a week in your day-to-day workflow, you got to start looking at that, because the number of ways that using AI has made my life significantly easier, and I've gotten things done significantly faster than I wouldn't have. Uh, it's almost it's kind of crazy, kind of looking back, not having that. And so I definitely encourage, if you're building out products, if you're trying to think of new ideas, if you're trying to brainstorm, hey, how should I respond to this email, right? Maybe not copy paste the email into, chat gpt if it's private information, but number of different companies, obviously Google, but companies even like Apple, they're building their own AI tools to help their employees use AI to do their job more efficiently. And so just think about that from your day-to-day job, that there is so many different ways that you can use this new tool to help you be more efficient and ultimately successful in your role. So
Yeah, and
tangent,
maybe
but
one way to think about it as an employee, or as somebody who's trying to be productive in general, um, the expectations with AI now on the horizon, or even here, are that everybody becomes more productive. And so,
yep.
those expectations rise over time, and you either keep up with that or you don't. And AI is the enabling factor at the moment. So yeah, it's one of those situations where, you need to jump on the train, as opposed to being run over by the train.
Yeah,
So,
I mean,
that's the way I think about it.
it saved me hours probably at times.
Yeah.
Just and when you're working a busy job and you have almost all day meetings, and you need, you have a 3-hour stint where, you just need to get some stuff done.
Yeah.
Every minute counts, right? It's
Yeah. No
you really
doubt.
need that time. So yeah,
No doubt.
it's cool.
Well, it seems like it almost goes without saying then, Josh, but um, product management and strategic planning, really go hand in hand. How do you see product management fitting into strategic planning?
Product management and strategic planning are very much tied together. I think once you have a product management department or group, or even person, if it's a smaller company, product management has to be heavily involved in really defining that strategic plan. A big part of it is what we talked about already, right? Is that product management is going to the customer, right? It's going and getting that voice of customer. It's doing the market research. It's doing things like SWOT analysis, right? To figure out what your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats are. Um, and so as you're doing that, and as you're building out your product vision, you're kind of building out a lot of your strategic plan as part of that as well. There might be other business objectives, right, outside of product that you're trying to do. And so obviously you want to incorporate those into your roadmap as well. But it's really a key pillar, I would say, of the strategic planning process, because of all those things we've talked about.
Yep, that sounds great, Josh. And I'll take this opportunity to pitch our most recent white paper, or maybe it was the second to most recent white paper, which is all about strategic planning. It's out on our website, and I wanted to make the point that these two, product management and strategic planning, are very tightly coupled. And to your point, much of the work that gets done with a strategic planning process is, either the same or very well aligned with product management. And what we've tried to do is to give people a framework for what that should look like. And then we've provided a bunch of tools as well that can be used to facilitate that process. We, of course, offer services kind of in and around facilitating the process as well, but the tools are out there on the website. And so I just wanted to make mention of that while we had the chance.
Anytime you can use those types of tools to accelerate those processes or push processes, create new processes and things like that. I mean, that's so key. I feel like in a lot of places that I've seen, there's not really process defined. People just do things, and when you do things, it's really hard to replicate, right? And it's really hard to get everybody on the same page. There's a lot of kind of disjointedness, especially really at any size of company, small, medium, and large. It's almost harder at the larger size companies, right?
Yeah.
You really need better definition of process, because without that process and having a good strategic plan and a good process for a strategic plan, it kind of falls apart, and it's hard to replicate year after year. And so having tools like that is just super important in order to make sure that that's successful.
Yeah, and I talk a little bit about this in the white paper, but my observation over the years has been that companies and employees of companies will find ways to keep themselves busy, but busyness doesn't drive any kind of strategy. So yes,
Yeah.
they're busy. Yes, they're doing things. Yes, they're completing their day-to-day tasks and keeping the business afloat. But we're not moving mountains at that point. We're just sort of existing and doing what we need to do to stay afloat. Strategy is all about doing the big things. Product management is a huge part of that. But there's a lot more to it than that as well. So that's what those tools and what that white paper is all about. Josh, I know we're about out of time, but I wanted to ask one last question, and that was if you could maybe give kind of your take on the difference between product management and product ownership, and then maybe just talk for a minute about what you think some of the key metrics are for each of the two categories.
So starting with the product management versus product ownership, it's one area I think that some, especially smaller companies, could struggle with a little bit more, is just kind of defining those and making that clear on what that is. I've gone to companies where there's little product management, and it's basically kind of on the product owner level, and then others where there's product managers but not product owners. So let me kind of define the difference between those two. So a product manager really sets the vision, the strategy, the roadmap for the product, right? They're really more commercial facing. They're really more customer facing and working directly with customers to help define that vision and roadmap. The difference with a product owner, and a product owner is such a key part to this process, and I've seen this product management function fall apart because there really wasn't a good product owner in place. Not a good product owner, not from a person perspective. I mean, there's no product owner, right? Product ownership doesn't exist. It's the product manager and then the engineering team. Is the product owner really manages the day-to-day prioritization and planning. So they are really the linchpin for this whole product management process. And so what they do is, for example, myself as a product manager, the product manager would work kind of on a day-to-day basis. I've got great relationships with my product owners. And so working with the product owners and making sure you have a great relationship with that person, because you are yin and yang, right? You are tightly coupled, and you need to both work together to make sure that this product is successful. So I'm working with them to make sure that they clearly understand the vision, they clearly understand the feedback that we're getting from the customer, and they clearly understand kind of the roadmap and the strategy and everything that's kind of happening at that level. They're basically using that, and we kind of work together. So I would basically put together a business case, for example. We would somewhat collaborate on the business case. They can't do everything. So I'm basically, as a product manager, really putting together the business case, all the different pieces that are needed, kind of the high level requirements. And then they're working with the engineering team to kind of translate those requirements into different tickets for the engineering team to actually complete. And then they're a part of those daily stand-ups, right? So they're a part of those daily stand-ups, working with the engineering team, understanding kind of from a day-to-day basis what's actually happening from a development standpoint. And there is things on a daily basis that can change, right? There's a new bug that comes in. Do you prioritize the bug, or do you prioritize the new feature that you want to build out? And so there's always almost daily decisions that product owner has to make to make sure that they're moving the product forward, the product roadmap forward. They're making sure they're getting all the bugs worked out. They're helping provide perspective to the engineering team from the customer's perspective. And so it's a key part of this process. So really, like I said, that day to day. One of the other philosophies that I've heard regarding the product management, product ownership, is that one thing that you want to do is try to get the end developer as close to the customer as possible. And the reason that you do that is there's different decisions that an engineer needs to make as well in the way that they're coding a product, the way that they're designing the hardware in the product, right? The way that they're doing anything related to the product. Those small decisions sometimes make a big impact in the way that the product is experienced by the customer. So, for example, there might be 3 different protocols that you could potentially use for the way you want to communicate to the device from a cloud. Depending on the protocol, there's going to be different advantages and disadvantages of that protocol. And so the more that the technical team, the engineers, the architect understand the needs of the customer and really are kind of closer to the customer, the more they can make the better decisions that they can make in order to make sure they're solving those customers' needs. And so I've seen in some cases where they actually pull the customer, product management and product ownership is still there, but they actually pull the customer a little closer to the engineering team in some cases, having the engineering team actually go out and visit customers or things like that in order for them to kind of really better understand the market too, so they can make those small day-to-day decisions as well. But I just want to put that out there because that's another philosophy that I've seen implemented and discussed in different kind of product management circles. That's kind of a key component of this as well. But you can't go too far in extreme on that because the engineering team only has so much bandwidth. And if you try to say, oh, we're just going to have the engineering team get all the feedback directly and build out the product, they just don't have time to do that level of planning, organization, road mapping in order to make sure that, we're moving in the right direction from a long-term perspective. So there's a balance there that I think every team has to strike.
Yeah, that's great perspective, Josh.
And then I think the second question, the last question you had was on the metrics. Metrics, there's a number of different metrics that I think are really good and I've seen pretty consistently. Things like a net promoter score. If you're not familiar with that, I definitely recommend anybody looking that up. Net promoter score is a really good tool just to better understand how much your customers like your product. So that's really helpful. If you have a software-based product, it's really easy to incorporate that into your platform by just having kind of a quick pop-up with a survey, which is just give me a number 1 through 10, how much you like my product and how much you would promote our product, or are likely to promote our product. And so it's a really quick, easy way to get the temperature, and you can get some really good feedback from there. You can get some good engagement. So that's one good one. Like I said, if you have a software product too, things like user churn. So how many users are coming onto the platform versus how many users I'm losing. What's your daily active users, things like that. That can help kind of move a lot of different product decisions. Different companies, you might have something like new product revenue. Revenue is obviously important from a product success standpoint. If you're not making money, you are not going to have that product very much longer, right? So you have to make sure that revenue is there. But you can't get too focused on the revenue and some of the numbers as well, because I've seen where you get so focused on those numbers that you lose sight of your customer, and then you lose sight of your customer, and then you see those numbers start to dwindle, and you're like, why is my revenue going down, right? I'm trying to do all this stuff to increase revenue, but it's really because your customers don't like your product, right? And so you have to make sure you have those balanced metrics between, financial, as well as, customer perspective, and as much as you can quantitative. Qualitative is just so hard to. Is my customer happy? I don't know. What's your definition of happy, right? So making sure that's as quantitative as possible is also key.
Yeah, I love Net Promoter Score. I've used that at the past couple of companies, and it really does give you a succinct view on how you're viewed by the customer. And in my experience, and we can talk about timelines and ramps and all of that sort of thing, but we're really talking about the customer experience. And when you focus the company and the company's efforts on the customer experience, the rest of this, the financial part, the revenue, the growth, tends to take care of itself. It's It's not to say that, products sell themselves, they don't, but, and, the sales and marketing functions are obviously critical in that mix. But if every function is focused on the customer experience, it seems like, the NPS score reflects that. And those are the companies that are tending to grow and meet their expectations from a revenue and profitability standpoint. At least that's been my experience.
Yeah, and looking at, it's part of that too. I think looking at who your customer is. Like I think a lot of companies don't really truly understand who's really paying, especially in complex scenarios like in government, for example. It can be kind of challenging to figure out, okay, like what's the persona that I'm selling to? Who are the people that are actually buying this? Who's getting the value? Who's really driving the sale as part of it? I've seen in certain companies where they kind of there's kind of a disconnection between who their primary customer and primary revenue driver is. And I think Apple does a really good job of this, right? So Apple, and maybe Apple's a cheap example because they're a $1 trillion company, one of the many now. But the thing that's really cool about Apple and the way that they approach it is they try to just look at, okay, who's our user and what are all the different things that they would potentially purchase, or what's the different pieces of value that I can build onto my portfolio and my ecosystem, right? I think what happens sometimes is we build out a product, we build out that feature, and we say, okay, this feature, right? So maybe I'll give an example. I'm building I don't know. I'm building a pool, right? My product is I sell pools to in California, right? People love having pools in California. So as part of the pools in California, why do people want pools in California? Well, they want it because they want somewhere to kind of cool off and relax and hang out and things like that. And so the pool company might just focus on, okay, we want to make this pool just really high quality, right? Really solid for that customer and things like that. But they maybe aren't looking at all the other pieces that are in and around the pool that add value to the person that's using the pool. Maybe that user also wants a kitchen from you, right? An outdoor kitchen from you. Maybe that user also wants a deck from you, right? Like what are all the different areas that you can expand from within your business, within your product line? Outside of what your original box was. My original box was pools. Yeah, hot tub was kind of adjacent, so that made sense. But maybe outdoor kitchens don't make as much sense. But wow, if you talking to your users and they say, wow, if you guys sold us a kitchen too, because you're already doing all this other work with us, man, that would be awesome. We'll just add that on, right? And so there's a number of different just opportunities that are available, and I've seen that missed in certain companies where they don't realize that user doesn't want to buy from 15 different vendors. If you can give them more from you as a user and provide a more unified experience, it's a way easier sell than trying to move into a new market with a new type of customer with just expanding with what you have can be really beneficial. And that's why I use Apple as an example, right? They already have their phone there. Oh, by the way, here are these AirPods, right? Here's this laptop that integrates well with them, right? Looking at that user and their needs and what's easily expandable within that user, I think is an important piece of that too.
Yeah, I mean, I think people like to buy from companies that they know and they trust. And so if they have adjacent needs, their first place to stop is going to be what they've been happy with in terms of what they've already purchased. That's a really important message to leave our listeners with.
Well, that's about all the time we have for today, Josh. Wonderful conversation. It was great to see you. Thanks for coming on the Let's Talk Growth podcast to share your insights on product management.
Thanks, guys. Mike and Bill, really appreciate the time. Looking forward to talking more and hopefully joining again as a guest in the future. We'll see what the future holds.
Sounds good. Thank you very much, Josh.
You're always welcome.
All right, thanks.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Let's Talk Growth. Be sure to join Mike and I in the next episode of the podcast.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of Let's Talk Growth. If you enjoyed it, feel free to rate and review the podcast. You can get new episodes and listen to old ones by visiting marketwiseadvising.com/podcasts. Let's Talk Growth is owned, produced, and published by MarketWise Advising, LLC.